want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend. Hey everybody, Clark Fredericks here with a new episode of the Free Like Me podcast. Guests come in here, speak their truth, leave their pain and shame behind, and walk out of here free like me. If you want to be a guest sitting across from me, or do you want to be involved in my coaching program, reach out to me privately on any social media site. Send me a private message or go to my website, freelike-me.com, fill out the form on the page and set up a consultation call. And we'll either get you started on coaching or we'll get you sitting across from me here in the studio. My book, Scarred, I started writing it 10 years ago. 3 years ago, I got a publishing deal from Simon & Schuster, and July 29th, it came out. So we just hit 4 weeks this week, and we've sold out the first print. I can't thank you enough for the support. The book is getting rave reviews. It has a perfect 5-star review on Amazon. It's got a 4.8 on Goodreads. It's changing lives. I can't tell you the number of messages I get every single day from people who have read the book and say it's changed my life. So please go get yourself a copy. Let's get this second print sold out, and we'll go on to the third. So thank you, everybody. I humbly and gratefully say thank you. And this week's guest is David Clohessy. He's the former national director for SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests. So you know what happened to him as a child? Abused by a priest. So we're going to hear from him on his childhood. We're going to hear on his take on the Catholic Church. He knows all the ins and outs. So let's meet David. David, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Clark. Appreciate it very much.
You are the former national director for SNAP, which is Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests.
Right.
How long did you serve in that capacity?
Oh, about 30 years. I've been with the group about 35 years total.
Awesome. And you retired how long ago?
Oh, I stepped down from full-time work about 6 years ago, roughly.
You're in Missouri and you still have a position with the local chapter there?
Yeah, just a volunteer director now.
And for those who don't know, what exactly does SNAP do, like on the local level and then on the national level?
Our goal basically is to protect the vulnerable and heal the wounded. When we started back in the late 80s, we were strictly a support group, a confidential self-help group for anybody who was abused in any religious context. Over time, though, gradually, we began to put a greater emphasis on the first half of that mission statement, which is to protect the vulnerable. So we began to be more activist and more publicly visible in trying to expose predators and enablers and to reform archaic predator-friendly legislation and that sort of thing. But day in and day out, but at both the national and local level, about 80 or 90% of what we do is simply respond to people who are hurting and confused and often ashamed and wondering how they can move past this horrible trauma.
And are you also working at enacting new statute of limitations laws in various states?
Absolutely. Yes. We're especially, obviously, both criminal and civil are important. There seem to be plenty more people who are working on relaxing or repealing the criminal statute of limitations. SNAP tends to work more on the civil side. But yeah, we absolutely believe that, a rigid statute of limitations only protects the wrongdoers and makes it easier for offenders to keep on offending. And that oftentimes when the criminal justice system doesn't or can't go after the predators and their enablers, it's good and it's helpful and productive and healing for survivors to do that in the civil context whenever they can.
I mean, I've heard, from my guests here, every type of abuse, but the two that really get me the most are a father with a child, their own child, and then a priest. There's just something that's such a betrayal about what a priest is actually supposed to be doing. And then to do this is just something it's just so disgusting to me.
Well, thankfully, you're not alone. A lot of people just are repulsed by the whole notion and then doubly repulsed when they learn that very, very often the church hierarchy has at best ignored the crimes and at worst concealed the crimes. And of course, when abuse happens, it's all horrible, no doubt, and all hard to deal with. But when it happens in the religious context, I think it really does leave so many people just rudderless, right? Because most people have a spiritual life. Most people, when they're in trouble, they turn to God for help. But when God's representative on earth is the one who's doing the harm, then I think it leaves kids feeling especially lost and confused and alone.
I had a set not set well he former centenary university professor, then he became a Seton Hall professor, and he described the abuse of a child as soul murder, and that's just what and it murders your faith too in most times.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, a substantial minority of the thousands of people who were involved in SNAP, a substantial minority of them have found their a faith life. Often it's not in Catholicism, and almost always it comes after years or decades of spiritual struggle and estrangement and confusion. But many people are able to get some sort of religion in their lives again. But the good news is, frankly, that survivors can recover from this, whether they are atheists or agnostics or Catholics or Baptists. It's tough, but recovery can happen. Absolutely.
Just like you said, I went decades with a dividing wall between myself and a higher power, just angry and back when I was a child in the Episcopal Church, the old minister made it sound like, you do good, good will happen. You step out of line, you could incur God's wrath. And it's like, what could a little 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old kid do to incur God's wrath to allow this? That's how your mind back then is functioning.
Absolutely. No matter how the abuse happens, it, I'm not a psychologist, but it seems to me, in my experience, that almost inevitably, the first question a child asks is, what did I do wrong? Even though, of course, the children are utterly blameless. And oftentimes that's because of predators are shrewd. And what they often do is they groom kids by blurring the boundary gradually and saying, hey, look at this pornographic magazine with me, or let's smoke a joint together, or let's, each have a beer. And so when or we'll stay out late past curfew, any number of things, minor transgressions. So then when the actual assault happens, the kid feels like, well, if I hadn't had those glasses of champagne, this wouldn't have happened. Or if I hadn't agreed to stay up late with this priest overnight at the rectory, I wouldn't have been harmed. So that just adds to the tragedy and adds to the kind of feeling of helplessness that so many wounded kids and wounded adults feel after sexual abuse.
I did a speech. I co-headlined a speech, and the other headliner was a retired detective who worked sex crimes. And he said almost all of the crimes he investigated involved priests. And he went in to say how, and he actually read the passages. They would add passages to the Bible stating what the young boys are expected to do to the elders of the church. And then there was passages what the elders should do to the young boys to purify them. Have you heard that in your yeah. It's
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I
disgusting.
mean, these guys, they are driven with this uncontrollable compulsion. And to satisfy that compulsion, they will create all kinds of crazy mental and spiritual and psychological uh, ruses, if you will, right? Or justifications for their activities. And they manage to convince many of them convince themselves that they're not really not doing anything wrong, and in fact that this is an expression of love, and this is a expression of they're caring for this child. Because most of the times abuse, at least in the Catholic context, it's not a sudden, violent, out of the clear blue sky kind of act. It usually comes only after very carefully selecting a vulnerable kid and very, very, very carefully grooming him or her with these very gradual blurring of the boundaries. Uh, and again, the priests say, I'm doing it under the guy because of sexual sex education, right? Or I'm doing it to show this poor kid has no father, and so I'm showing him affection that he needs. And
We'll circle back to the church, but I've found that most people that get involved in, either uh, therapy work, nursing work, policing, or in your case, as a national director for SNAP, there's a reason why they get involved in certain fields to help and protect and give back because they've experienced their own trauma at a young age. And you're no different from myself, are you?
you're totally right. The so-called helping professions are just chock full of people who have endured, unspeakable crimes as kids, and they want to make sure that others don't suffer in the same way.
One of my biggest supporters has been law enforcement, and I've done numerous speeches for prosecutors associations and law enforcement and sex crimes conventions. And uh, I shouldn't be shocked, but I'm shocked at the end of every one of my speeches when detectives come up to me and say, I do this work because I was abused as a child also. And I'm like, wow, I didn't get that every single speech. And I get that with therapists and nurses. So it's just, um, so take me back to young David and, where'd you grow up? What era? And tell me about your childhood.
Sure, sure. Well, I'm almost 70. I grew up in the 50s and 60s in a small town in rural Missouri, and in a very devout Catholic family with 6 kids. The church was 2 blocks from our house. We went to parochial school. Church was big, big in our lives. And I was groomed by our associate pastor. Took a great interest in me and showered attention on me and gifts and the like, and soon started offering to take me on trips. We both enjoyed the outdoors, so he would take me camping and canoeing and hiking. And the first time I saw the mountains was on a trip with him, and the first time I saw the ocean was on a trip with him. We were sort of a working class family, and with 6 kids, we didn't have a lot of those kind of vacation opportunities. Um, and it was on those trips that he abused me, and much later in life, I found out that he abused uh, three of my three of my brothers as well. Uh, one of whom actually went on to become a priest and molest kids himself.
Oh, I had a therapist who worked in a diagnostic center for pedophiles, and she said it's a myth that all pedophiles were abused as children. That they like to use that to garner sympathy. Uh, but in your brother's case, that's actually the truth. And it's those of us who've been abused, we should know better to replicate that because of the pain we experienced. And that breaks my heart that he went down that road.
Yeah. Well, he attended. I think at 6th grade onward, he was at a seminary where years later we discovered there were, a number of predator priests. So I suspect that, his abuse, he suffered at the hands of more than one. And it went on, I suspect, for a long, long time. That's no excuse, of course. You're absolutely, absolutely right. Speaking of myths, as you did, there's a myth that people who were sexually abused as kids grow up to be abusers. And as you well know, um, technically that's true, but I'm pretty convinced it's a very, very small percentage. And the overwhelming majority of abuse survivors go in exactly the opposite direction. Sometimes so much so that they don't want to have children of their own.
So many of us get such a rough start to life, and it's and then the cards are stacked against us for a long time, and we're left holding the shame. Like the abusers walk away, it seems shameless. So not only do we have the shame and the pain and limited coping skills, because of the era we grew up on. Nowadays, you can hit a button on your phone and be connected with, networks of abuse survivors, or alcoholics can do an online AA meeting or whatever it is. But back in the day, there was nothing. There was no. I'm sure in rural Missouri, there was no avenues for you to begin healing.
No, no, no. And of course, especially again in a religious context, many times predatory clergy of all denominations, they pick kids from very devout families because what they don't want the kid to tell, right? But they also don't want the parents of that kid to believe the kid if they tell. So, they don't just randomly pick somebody off the street, but they pick somebody who, even if you do manage to find the words and the courage to say, hey, mom, here's what Reverend so-and-so is doing. The predators want a mom who will say, oh, you must have misunderstood. He was just trying to be nice. Or, okay, so he had too much to drink at that party. I'm sure it's never going to happen again. Um, I mean, they're very, very shrewd.
When I was working on the statute of limitations law in New Jersey, my partner in crime was Fred Merigliano. We would go meet with
He's a great guy.
senators. Oh,
Yeah.
Fred, yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he's like the priest was revered when I was a child,
Absolutely.
revered.
Yep.
And he would come over to our house after mass for Sunday meals,
Yeah.
and just my parents looked up to him, and we were taught to look up to him as well, and
Yeah.
and he would abuse Fred as his father snored on the couch downstairs after dinner right in front of him.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
Uh,
I mean, eh, they're like the lowest of low, and yet then people that work side by side with them and the hierarchy of the church protect them.
that
It
yes.
oh
And I would argue that those who ignore and conceal child sex crimes in some ways are worse than the offenders. Because you're right, not every pedophile was abused as a kid. I think many were. And even the ones who weren't sexually abused, it was oftentimes psychological trauma or something. Normal people aren't sexually attracted to kids, right? But their colleagues, and most importantly, their supervisors, there's no excuse, right? For not picking up the phone and calling 911 if you see or suspect abuse. Right? There's no excuse for moving a predator from one town to the next town. And so I really think that that's in some ways the bigger problem in religious settings. It's not the number of child molesting clerics, it's the number of people who turn a blind eye or who say, we're going to handle this in-house, pastorally, instead of doing their civic duty and their moral duty, I would argue, which is, call the independent professionals in law enforcement, for heaven's sakes. Um, I think about these bishops who, again, want to handle it internally, and I think, you've got a great education. You know a ton about church history and about church music and about church theology and church governance, but you were not trained in forensic investigatory techniques, right? And you're anything but unbiased. So the church officials who hire and train and supervise these predators, they're the last people who ought to be trying to get to the bottom of an abuse report, right? They should turn it over to the police and prosecutors. And, the Bible talks about, turning over to Caesar what is Caesar's. And this is exactly the place where religious leaders need to take a step back and say, way beyond my pay grade, the criminal matter, let the criminal justice system deal with this.
Anytime I post about the Catholic Church, I get these, a handful of devout Catholics that just stop attacking my faith and my religion and my church. And I'm like, I'm not attacking faith. I'm attacking the hierarchy that has created this system of smoke and mirrors where nothing has been done to really correct it. It's they say things, but it's not backed up by protocol.
And I think the root of the problem, Clark, is that the Catholic Church is a unique institution, right? It is a monarchy. And the Lord of the kingdom, there are no checks and balances, right? And in the Catholic Church, there are about 5,000 bishops across the planet, and they all report to the Pope. Well, on its face, that's an untenable model, right? Nobody can supervise 5,000 people. And so what happens is each bishop runs his own kingdom and answers to no one. So I challenge people. I say, think of a monarchy. Think of a king somewhere or a country that's run by royalty or dictators where power is not abused. It is abused. It's abused all the time. That's why, we're all such big fans of democracy, because there are checks and balances, and no one person makes all the decision and can break all the rules all the time. So I believe that's the crux of it. That church officials have no real countervailing force that prevents them from acting irresponsibly, except the justice system. And that's why I'm thrilled that you worked on the statute of limitations, because I believe that's the quickest and most effective and most fair way to deal with child sex crimes and cover-ups.
At every hearing in Trenton, the capital of New Jersey, we would have the Catholic Church would be there with their lawyers opposing the new law. And, they would get up there on the microphone, and your sons and daughters' parochial school, will be forced to be shut down, by all these lawsuits coming forward. Well, do you hear what you're saying? All these lawsuits. So you're basically admitting that there's a huge enough problem that it could bankrupt a school. Well, I'm sorry. Then that's what needs to happen over and over and over for the church to finally make good on actual change. Let these schools be shut down.
And what bishops, of course, never acknowledge is that they've got tons of insurance coverage to deal with this issue. It was revealed in Los Angeles a few years back that the Archdiocese had 9 different insurance policies that they could turn to for help when they had to pay money to victims. So for years and years, the church has been on the decline. It happened long before the abuse scandal became, so public. So the church is suffering, and some churches and schools are closing. It has much more to do with demographics and the overall decline of religion in our society. It has less to do with abuse and cover-up. But you're absolutely right, Clark. In state after state after state, church officials take the parishioners' money and use it to defend and protect predators instead of using it to protect and defend children.
I can't understand anybody that would tithe to the Catholic Church right now. Like you are supporting abuse. Like you can have your faith all you want, but don't give your money over to these people. it's going, it's going, they're using it to pay lawyers to protect the priests.
In some ways, it makes me sad. It doesn't surprise me because while bishops hire really smart lawyers to defend themselves, they also hire really smart PR people. And about 25 years ago, the PR people said, stop denying that it happens, Bishop. Just pretend that you're really sorry and you're really reforming. And so for 25 years, the Catholics in the pews have heard that over and over again. We're sorry for the sins of our past, but now we handle things differently. And of course, like you said, they don't. They say they do, but in reality, they don't. And I would challenge Catholics. I would say, well, look, if your bishop has reformed, and if there are no more predator priests, and if there are no more enabling colleagues and supervisors, then why do they fight the statute of limitations? Right? They've got to be afraid of something, and what they're afraid of is more abuse being uncovered, more complicity being disclosed, and that, again, if they were doing things right, they would say, yeah, sure, bring on the lawsuits, bring on the police, bring on the prosecutors. You're just not going to find us doing wrong anymore.
Correct.
And they have no fundamental incentive to change because bishops, the ones who ignored and conceal it, they experience no consequences. A tiny handful of bishops have been suspended or have been forced to retire early. No bishop has lost his title. No bishop has been excommunicated. Only one bishop has been defrocked, and that was Ted McCarrick from New Jersey. But imagine that. These bishops, even the ones who have to resign in disgrace, they still show up at church functions wearing all the regalia. They still get their pensions and they still get their honorary titles, and they show up in Rome to help elect the new pope. So the truth is, why would you change? If you worked all your life to become a bishop and you were forced to retire early because you put kids in harm's way, why should you change your ways? This may sound, I don't mean to sound too flippant, but I say all the time, I've never heard of a bishop who drives a smaller car or cleans his own rectory, or takes fewer vacations, or has experienced a pay cut because he mishandled abuse cases. Doesn't happen. So, they have an incentive to keep doing what the church has always done, except to keep saying, I'm really, really sorry. And now we're doing better over and over and over.
I came from a PR person.
Absolutely. If you come to my house and I meet you on the front porch, Clark, I can say over and over and over, I'm sorry I've been a slob in the past, but now my house is clean as a whistle. Okay. But if I don't let you inside to see, are you going to believe that I've turned my life around? Of course not. And bishops continue to be incredibly secretive about this. But if they were reforming, they would open the doors and the windows and say, look at how we've changed and how we did it. And all you other institutions can learn from this horrible scandal in the church. Learn about how we've turned this ship around. But they don't. They continue to be both reckless and secretive at the same time.
What you're saying, is what's been happening pope after pope is a pope will say, like, all right, we're enacting change. We're doing this. There's going to be reporting this. We're going to have this. And then everybody nods their heads. And then the bishops, they're not forced to do it. They're not forced to make anything mandatory.
Right. Honestly, this may sound naive, but I honestly think it would take just a handful. In the US, there's about 200 bishops. I think if the Pope were to come along and say, these five guys, these five bishops are among the worst, and I'm removing them from the office of bishop, I'm taking their Roman collars, they can't present themselves as priests, and I'm even going to yank their retirement. Okay. Not because they committed abuse, but because they ignored it or concealed it. If that happened to just 5 bishops in America, I think that would be that would just send a chill up the spine of many, many, many church employees and church officials. And I think it would prompt some dramatic change. Of course, even more simply, if 5 bishops or even if 3 bishops were locked up because the justice system said, you're supposed to report these crimes. Instead of reporting them, you enabled them. If just a handful of bishops were thrown behind bars, I think that would make an enormous change. But it hasn't happened, and I'm not very optimistic about it happening.
Why hasn't that happened? Why doesn't it happen?
It's a combination of factors, but the two biggest are, I think, the incredible political clout of the church hierarchy, and many very archaic, weak child protection laws. So, for example, in many states, certain occupations are mandatory reporters of abuse, right? If you're a teacher, or if you're a social worker and you suspect that some kid is being hurt and you don't call 911, you can be punished, okay? But two things. Number one, often clergy are exempted from that. And number two, the penalties can be extremely light. In several states, the maximum penalty you pay if you see a kid being raped and you're a social worker or an educator and you don't call the police, $1,000 fine. I mean, that's just outrageous. Who's gonna stick their neck out and risk their job by calling the police about a crime if the worst penalty you end up paying is $1,000, right? I mean, I would argue that the penalties for ignoring or concealing abuse ought to be just as high as the penalties for committing abuse. Because again, the abusers, many times they just can't control themselves. They're psychologically messed up and they just can't. But presumably their colleagues can, and they know better, and they can pick up the phone, and the same with their supervisors, but they just don't have the incentive to do that.
Are you familiar with the Fortney sisters?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I interviewed Lara and Patty on here, and just so the audience is aware that the type of person the church is hiding and protecting. This priest that abused all 5 members of the family was into collecting their underwear, collecting their menstrual pads, tampons, collecting their urine, and collecting their excrement. And he kept it all for all 5 and took pictures of all 5 and just had them all labeled. And, and that's that's as low down of a predator as you can get. And the church still protects them.
Vast majority of predator priests are never formally defrocked, right? They're oftentimes suspended. They're told you can't present yourself as a priest in public, but they're not defrocked, which means they still get a paycheck. And there have been scores of Catholic priests convicted in criminal court of molesting youngsters who go to prison and are still being paid by the church. And they come out of prison and they're still being paid by the church. So it is no wonder that things don't really change.
Wow. The only way a priest loses his paycheck and his pension is by defrocking.
Yes, and that process often takes years and years, and it has to go through the Vatican. For example, I filed suit against the priest who molested me in 1991, and other victims came forward, and my priest was defrocked. I got a letter about him being defrocked this spring. So 1991 until 2025, he's finally been defrocked. I believe that my brother, the priest, the one who molested, he certainly was suspended and he certainly was not put back in a parish again. But as best I can tell, he's not been defrocked. Right. So again, for decades, he continues to, and frankly, at the risk of sounding dreadfully cynical, Clark, I believe, you've heard that old expression about keeping your friends close, but your enemies closer. I believe that bishops know that these predator priests, they know about other wrongdoing in the church. And so the bishop thinks, well, yes, I can never put Father Mike back in charge of a school or a parish. But I'm going to keep paying him. I'm going to keep giving him that health insurance because the last thing I want him to do is to turn on us and start telling about, the other priests who cruise gay bars at night or who hit on the adult women in the choir or take cash from the till. The thing is, in the Catholic theology, um, priests can have no sex of any sort. And under that scenario, under that restriction, I think what it means is that there's a lot of sexual secrets, that in fact, most priests have a sexual secret of some sort. I mean, maybe it's porn, maybe it's masturbation. Again, maybe it's consenting adult sex. And so in a situation where almost everybody has a sexual secret, nobody is going to turn on or rat on their colleagues. Nobody is, right? In fact, my brother Kevin, the priest, said to me at one point, the priesthood is a tiny, shrinking, beleaguered club of very lonely men. And all they have are their brother priests, really. So again, and priests work in a diocese forever, right? They're not free agents. They don't get traded like baseball players do. And they can't quit a job and move somewhere else and get the same kind of job. When you're a priest, you swear allegiance to a bishop of one diocese. So if you speak up and report any kind of wrongdoing by your peers, you become ostracized. And you have to work the rest of your life around people who say, he's disloyal. He's the one that blew the whistle on Father Bob. So, they're all staying silent.
Do you have any any hope that the new Pope will make dramatic change?
Yeah. I mean, again, the structure has remained completely intact. Bishops have always had virtually all the power in their diocese, and they still have all the power in their diocese. So now I'll tell you where I have hope. I have hope in the secular world, because about 25 state attorneys general have done investigations into Catholic sex crimes and cover-ups. About 25 states have reformed these archaic statutes of limitations. As you mentioned, there are support groups all over these days, both in SNAP and in other places. And it's ever so gradually, I believe, it's ever so gradually becoming not quite so hard to say, this happened to me. And to say, here's the name of my predator, and to take action so that that predator can't hurt others. It's still very difficult for all the reasons you cited earlier, shame and self-blame and embarrassment and confusion. But gradually that's changing. So I do have hope that the change is going to come not because of, but in spite of the church hierarchy. And I think in other institutions, we've seen a fair amount of progress. But in the Catholic Church, it's been painfully little and late and inconsistent, no matter who the Pope is and no matter who the bishop is. When an old bishop retires and a new bishop comes in, so many Catholics, they just assume the new guy is going to be better. And the new guy typically talks better, right? He will apologize more than his predecessor did, and he will hold more prayer services for victims than his predecessor did. But when it comes to the root of the problem, and push comes to shove, he'll behave very much the way bishops always have.
You mentioned, the attorney generals, doing investigations, I had Mark Crawford on, and he's, our own attorney general did an investigation, and the church has filed suit, and that report has been blocked from being revealed for years now. And the same thing at Seton Hall, an investigation, and the report has been blocked from being revealed by the church.
And yet, every Catholic bishop in the state keeps saying over and over and again, these days, when it comes to abuse, we're open and transparent. And I've read the stories about the scandal at Seton Hall, and every Seton Hall official says we want to be as transparent as possible. So in public, they say all the right things. In the courthouse and in the state house, they continue to do all the wrong things. What's interesting is, you know this. I mean, victims typically come forward decades later, decades later. So by the time, if we're really persistent and brave and lucky, we can expose the ones who molested us and the ones who protected them. And very often they're dead or they're retired, right? So these institutions, um, it's easy for them to be transparent about the past, but they're not, right? They refuse. So if they're not willing to be transparent about the wrongdoing that their predecessors engaged in, well, you can be certain that they're not going to be transparent about their own wrongdoing.
Just like you've touched on with people who turn a blind eye within the church, or just teachers or whatever worker it may be. The Boy Scouts have done the same exact thing for decades with their hierarchy. They kept they named it secret perversion files. Like that's the name they put on it for their scoutmasters who were doing this. And I'm talking like 60, 70, 80 years worth of keeping records. So you're talking a turnover of the hierarchy. How many times in over decades the hierarchy of the Boy Scouts have turned over and they've all marched to the same beat. Like not a single new head came in with a conscience or with a soul and said, like, this is insane. I couldn't imagine taking over the Boy Scouts and, saying, being handed over, a 20,000 file name of scoutmasters and saying, but we keep this under wraps. We just move them around and, we don't want this brought out to public. And I go, okay, yeah, I'll go along. I'll get in step.
If that's the way we've always done it, then yeah, that's the way I'm going to do it.
And it's the same with people who know a father is abusing a child, but they don't speak up.
It's a tiny semantic thing, but I try very hard not to use the word leaders because they're not scout leaders, they're not church leaders, they're scout officials, they're church officials. If you're a leader, right, you attack problems head on. And if you're a leader, you put the safety of those in your institution first. These are not men who do that. And obviously females can and do enable abuse, but the overwhelming majority of the officials in the Scouts and in the Catholic Church are men. And if you're a man and you're willing to ignore or hide, heinous crimes against kids, and if you're not even willing to pick up the phone and call the local sheriff or the local police about it, you don't deserve to be called a leader at all.
So your abuse occurred by this priest taking you on trips.
Right. Right.
And 4 out of 6 children in your family were abused by this guy.
Right.
Almost like the Fortney sisters,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he won over your family.
Oh, absolutely.
They have to win over the community, then they have to win over the family, and then they have to win over the victim.
Yeah.
And let's do a little cause and effect, so like, what were some of the repercussions in your own personal life after the abuse? Grades, sports, dating, drugs or alcohol. What did it do to you?
I'm no different than any other abuse survivor. I had no conscious awareness of it for a long time. I repressed every incident of abuse, it always happened late at night when the two of us were alone and I was asleep, and I would wake up and he would be abusing me, but the next morning I'd have no awareness of it at all. So, so it was not until I was about 30 when the memories started coming back. Um, but so I acted in my 20s and in college. I acted in ways that were a total mystery to me. And I would do, self-destructive kinds of things. I would sabotage relationships. I was, afraid of genuine, genuine connection with people, genuine intimacy. And I would do things that would hurt and upset and disappoint my parents. And I wouldn't understand why. It wasn't clear to me at all. And I had a great amount of hostility and distrust towards authority figures of all sorts in every context, especially male authority figures. And it wasn't until many, many decades later that I realized that the best professional work I've done over my career has always been when I've had a female supervisor, and I never had to have any doubts about what their motivations were. Um, and then once I remembered my abuse, then a lot of things became clear to me. But I've struggled with addictions, and I've struggled with depression and self-loathing and all those kinds of things. Fortunately, I've been in a ton of therapy. It's been very, very helpful. And I've gone to literally several hundred SNAP support group meetings. And again, I'm not a shrink. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know why misery loves company, if to be so trite, but it's so healing for people to sit around a room and hear from folks who are suffering in exactly the same ways for exactly the same reasons. And among our membership, we have members who are unemployed, underemployed, unemployable, self-employed. We have members who are in prison who have been suicidal. Um, People turn to all kinds of self-harm, and it's tragic because, like you said earlier, um, the predators, they're off scot-free. And I don't know, maybe they do have trouble sleeping at night, and maybe they're depressed too. I don't know, but I can tell you, I don't know of a single survivor who has lived the life of the ideal Boy Scout and never done a thing wrong and always turns in their library books on time and never says a crossword. That survivor doesn't exist. In fact, if I may, oftentimes defense lawyers will look at a successful survivor. I mean, someone like you or me who's built a pretty good life. And they'll say, well, the abuse must not have been that bad, right? David's not in prison. Clark isn't shooting up drugs all the time. But in fact, uh, the very behaviors that church defense lawyers use to discredit victims are proof of the abuse, right? They say, well, he's a drug addict, or she's an alcoholic, or he's on his fifth marriage, or she's been arrested 12 times for shoplifting. Well, duh. I mean, if you were sexually violated as a child by a powerful adult, yeah, you bet you're going to act out in odd and antisocial and criminal ways. I mean, those behaviors are proof that something traumatic happened to that child. They're not a reason to discredit that abuse report.
And when you came forward, the famous lines, that you got from the bishop, uh, was that I've never heard of this happening before. You're the first that I've ever heard come forward with this issue. So that's their mantra. I've never heard of this before, and you're the first.
And of course, of course, that's most often not true. And then they say things like, well, we're not sure how to deal with this, so you're going to have to be patient with us. And of course, they don't have to know a thing except that their civic and moral duty is to protect kids above all else and call the law. Bishops over and over again, when they say, we're sorry for what happened, before they say, now we've reformed, you know what else they throw in there? We're learning about this. We didn't really understand it, but now we're learning. Well, there's no learning curve here, right? I mean, if you see a baby laying in the middle of a highway, you don't need to know anything about traffic safety or about children's health to take action. You know what to do. So bishops don't lack education. They don't lack knowledge. They lack courage. And until they get it, we're going to keep seeing this over and over again.
What was the analogy you have of a drunk driver?
When people say to adult survivors of abuse, well, look, that happened a long time ago. Can't you just get over it? Well, I say if I'm run over by a drunk driver and I suffer severe injuries, but I get great medical help and I go to physical therapy and I fully recover 100%. But each morning when I go out to get my newspaper, I see the same driver in the same car holding that beer can in his hand. I'm not going to be able to get over my childhood trauma because I'm worried every day about him doing it to somebody else. So when the same systems and the same behavior and the same, um, you know, monarchical model is in place, that was in place when I was a kid, it's it's impossible to sort of turn the page and pretend like everything is suddenly hunky dory. And it's one of the most hurtful things that people can say to a survivor is, just get over it.
I've heard that a lot of times from mothers have said that to their child, just whether the mother was abused herself or not, but as a child, but she'll say, just get over it.
That's the reason so many of us turn to abusing substances because we want so desperately to get over it and we can't. So if I come home after work and I drink 24 beers for at least a couple hours, I will be over it, right? If I shoot up with heroin, I will be over it for a short span of time. But the fact that we have to become workaholic or sex addicts or whatever, that's a sign that, yeah, we really are trying to get over it. But we can't unless we deal with it head on and unless and until the wrongdoers face some consequences.
I tell people that reach out to me, like, I mean, going forward, against the church is one thing, but people who want to go confront their abuser to get that confession, to get that I'm sorry, I go, you're wasting your time. These people are either evil, they're without a soul, they're without a conscience, they're lacking something internally. And why would you want to hear what they had to say anyway? It's going to be BS, but you are not going to get that apology or that I'm sorry that you're looking for. It's just not going to happen.
You are so, so, so right. But let me add one thing. Even if you get it, you might feel some temporary relief, right? But that's going to fade because you're going to realize, well, he was trembling the whole time I was talking to him. So he was physically scared of me. So that's why he apologized. Or in the case of a supervisor, well, he apologized to me probably because his lawyer said, you got to try to keep this guy Clark from speaking about it publicly and filing a lawsuit. You got to kind of mollify him. So tell him over and over again, I'm really sorry, Clark, that happened to you. So you're not going to get it. And if you get it, it's not going to turn your life around, unfortunately. You've got to do the work of recovery, the long, hard, painful work of recovery yourself, irrespective of what happens with your perpetrator and those who helped him.
Thank you. You just validated what I tell every victim. It is like, all right, you have to accept that it happened. Like you can't change the past. What you can change is yourself and start working on yourself. Start getting healthy and doing all the things to create a healthy mindset, healthy soul, healthy body. You got to get self-love back. We lose our self-love when this happens, and that's what we got to work on.
Great advice. Great advice.
getting the "I'm sorry" is not gonna heal you,
No, and similarly, even those survivors who are again brave enough and persistent enough and lucky enough to see some form of justice, right? The perpetrator is fired, the perpetrator is sued, the perpetrator is at least publicly exposed in the media, or even the perpetrator goes to jail. Those will help. Or by the way, survivor gets a big settlement from the civil lawsuit, and that'll help, but not so much, not as much as doing that internal work that you talked about.
You got a battle on two fronts. One, if you can stop that person so they don't harm more children. If you can shame them publicly, if you can file a lawsuit, if you can expose them on social media, something to bring an end to what they're doing. That's the one front. The other front is working on yourself.
Right, right.
Do we know how the church got so infiltrated with pedophile priests?
I don't think we really do. I think this requirement of celibacy plays a role, but not the role that people think. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, if you can't have sex, then you're going to find it somewhere. And if you can't get married and have sex with a partner, maybe you'll turn to children. I don't think that's the case. I think the way celibacy plays into it is that when you ask men to be celibate, most will fail at it. And when they fail, then they will be vulnerable to blackmail. So picture and so their crimes and the crimes of other priests will be ignored or hidden. And picture a rectory with 4 priests, and one of them again cruises bars at night for casual sex, and one of them hits on the women in the choir. One of them subscribes to pornography and masturbates, and one of them takes little boys with him on vacation. Well, and abuses them. Right? We know what's the greatest sin, right? But those first 3, they all feel shamed and scared that someone might find out about what they're doing. And so, when Father Ted takes a kid on vacation with him, they're just not going to speak up. And the other way celibacy plays into it, by the way, is that you're just not going to get a lot of job applicants if that's a requirement, right? So when bishops do find somebody who is willing to join this monarchical system and be a serf in their kingdom, and promise to be celibate, bishops really, really, really want to hang on to that guy. So they will say to him, okay, you really shouldn't have been looking at child porn on the church computer. I'm going to send you to therapy for 6 months, and don't ever do it again. And of course, that all fits with the church theology, right? The church theology says 2 things. Number 1, sins can be forgiven and people can turn their lives around, right? So for all those reasons, I think, bishops really they don't give errant priests a second chance, right? They give them a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth and a 6th chance. And then often say, it's too hot now. You've been in 8 parishes in my diocese, and you've done some kind of sexual misconduct in 7 of the 8. I can't send you to a 9th. But I have a buddy who's a bishop out in Montana, and he says he's willing to give you another chance. In the secular world, I worked for a school district once, right? And I had 2 great advantages over any priest. My first advantage was I had a supportive wife. So I could come home and say, there's XYZ corruption in the school district. And she could say, well, I love you and you're wonderful. And, I support whatever you do. And the second advantage I had was that if there was XYZ corruption, I could quit my job and go to work, thousands of school districts across America. But a priest can't do that. If a priest in New Jersey says, I think my bishop is corrupt or my colleagues are wrongdoers, I'm going to cross the river and I'm going to be a priest in Manhattan. You can't do that as a priest.
That makes me then question so many of people, who are Catholic will say the right things about the priest who has abused, but they'll say, "Oh, but my priest is just the most wonderful guy." Like, from what you're saying now, like, is he really? Like, is he really the wonderful person you think? Is he speaking up about this
Right.
topic?
Right.
Yeah. Is he
Exactly.
putting his
Exactly.
is he willing to put his job on the line to do the right thing?
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah.
Is his priesthood more important than the well-being of children?
And I want to say to those parishioners, Clark, I want to say, well, guess what? The priest who molested me gave good sermons and everybody liked him and he was charming and he was charismatic and he was hardworking. Because let's face it, if you're a child molester and you're not charming, you're not good at your job, you don't work hard, and you offend people, no parent is going to trust you with their kid, and no kid is going to want to be around you. So the very attributes of your parish priest who you like so much, and those are the attributes that prove he's a good guy, they're the very same attributes that child molesters use to gain access to kids and gain the trust of parents. So I wish it were that simple, right? I mean, you can't walk down the street and identify a bank robber, right? The bank robber stands in line like everybody else. He doesn't butt in front of other people, and the bank robber says please and thank you and all the rest. You can't use these superficial personality traits to detect who is a really twisted, sick individual. You just can't.
Did what happened to you ruin your faith?
Yeah, and I really love the way you phrase that because so often people say, well, did you lose your faith? And at the risk of sounding sarcastic, I say, no, no, I lost my car keys, right? And I lost my favorite jacket, but my faith was stolen from me. And I'm an agnostic and mostly happy with it. But, um, I kind of really wish that I had a choice. And on a Sunday morning, but I don't feel like I really had a choice. On a Sunday morning, when I'm driving down the street and I see people on the church steps and they're hugging each other and they're smiling, and I think, wouldn't it be great to have that kind of supportive community? And I feel a twinge of sadness. But I quickly remind myself that, in fact, through SNAP, um, I do have that community. It doesn't get together in a building every Sunday morning. It's spread out all over the country. But I've met, some amazing, courageous, compassionate people through all this work, and people who really understand what it's like, and understand how to recover. And I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. When I tell people, I was the director of this support group for clergy sex abuse victims, they say, "Oh my gosh, that must have been horrible." And I say, "No, no, no. It was just the reverse. It was wonderfully rewarding and meaningful and all the rest." Early on, every call I got from a survivor really knocked me for a loop. But somehow, Clark, magically at some point, a little switch changed in my head, and I realized all that pain and all that abuse, it's out there, hidden. So every time a survivor calls for help, that's progress. Every single time, somebody is going to be getting better. Long, tough road. So, yeah, and then so that's where my hope comes from. To get back to your earlier question, it comes from the fact that every single day, survivors are breaking their silence. They're saying, "I've got to do something to end this, cycle of pain." Um, and and now, as you pointed out, there are many, many ways to do that now. In-person therapy, group therapy, online therapy, support groups, self-help books, lots of ways you can rebuild your life. It's not easy, obviously, but it absolutely can be done, whether your perpetrator is alive or dead, whether he's apologized or not, whether his boss was fired or is still in place, whether you've been denied justice or gotten justice, you can still get better.
Your abuser, I take it, is still alive. You said he just got defrocked in this year.
Yeah. The last I heard, he was living in Florida. He spent some time actually as a flight attendant, and I ran into him in an airport once. But but I do feel good because the minute I filed my lawsuit, I lost on the statute of limitations. Didn't get any discovery or depositions or settlement or any of that stuff. But the minute I filed my lawsuit, um, number one, he was publicly exposed. His name was in the newspaper, and number two, he was suspended. So obviously, suspended predators, like unemployed predators, they can still hurt kids, right? Changing a job title doesn't mean they're cured, but it does make it a little harder for predators to get access to kids. I mean, sometimes people say, well, I'd like to expose my predator, but if I do that, he'll just pick up and move across the country and start teaching at another school somewhere else. And I say, well, yeah, that may be true, but his name will live on the internet forever. And it'll be harder for him to start anew. Right now, he's been at the old school for 10 or 12 or 15 years, and he's developed a reputation and a core of people who like him and trust him. And you're going to put an end to that, and he'll be forced to start from ground zero again.
Why don't you tell me the name of your abuser?
Sure. His name is Father John Whiteley, Whiteley.
And where does he reside? Do we know?
Last I heard, it was in the Naples area of Florida, but he's also been in the Miami area. He works really hard to keep a very, very, very low profile.
Any last words? Anything you want to sum up with? Any last things you want to get out?
I think the important message is the one we've already talked about, that um, well, here I'll put it this way. Um, if you have a cold or if you have the flu, you don't really have to do anything. You'll get better over time on your own, right? But abuse is not like a cold or the flu. It's like a cancer. And you've got to deal with cancer head on. Because if you don't, it's just going to eat away at you. It's like a poison in your system. And if you ingest poison, you've got to get it out of your system some way, right? And throwing up or whatever. And so if you are abused and you do nothing, it's just going to eat away at you and eat away at you and eat away at you. And you may have convinced yourself on the surface, I've got a good life. I'm married, I have kids, I have a good job, whatever. But you're not living the life that you really deserve unless you face the abuse head on and deal with it, in therapy and in support groups. And it's got to start with you sharing your pain with somebody who gets it. It's scary, it's risky, but that's how you've got to start. It's too big a load for you to carry alone. And these days, like you referred a couple of times to back in the day, back years ago, but these days, many more people get it and understand. And I can tell you that in 35 years of this work, Clark, I've maybe talked to a handful of folks who say to me, well, I told my mom, or I told my best friend, or I told my husband, and I wish I hadn't. Almost no one says that. In the short term, yeah, it's hell, right? Your spouse thinks about leaving you, right? Or you tell somebody and then you can't sleep for 3 nights or whatever. So in the short term, it's hell. But in the long term, almost nobody that I've talked to has ever said, I wish I had just kept my mouth shut.
Yeah, it sounds like you just described my brother in those last words. I buried my brother, a little over 2 years ago, and He would not, could not, did not talk about it. And it killed him. And I know many others that it's killed, and it almost killed me. And that's why now I speak out, because try to save people from an early death. And I appreciate the work you've done to try to do the same. And you can't heal from something that you can't even talk about.
Right, right.
If you're ingesting poison, but you can't tell somebody what you're ingesting, you won't heal from it. So you have to speak about it. It's uncomfortable in the beginning. Like people see me do a podcast now, and the ones who haven't got their voice yet, they're like, I have no idea how you can talk so easy about what happened to you. And I go go find on YouTube my court proceedings and see my speech in court, and you'll see how tough it was. So it's tough in the beginning, but it's necessary. And so thank you for reiterating that.
Well, my pleasure. And congratulations to you on your recovery. I know it's always ongoing with all of us. And thank you very, very, very much for this opportunity and for all the work you have done and are doing.
Thank you, David. Much appreciated, bro. All right, everybody, there you have it. David Clohessy, former national director for SNAP. And you have to be able to talk about what happened to you in order to heal from it. Face it head on so you can move on. We'll see you next week. Peace.